Marine Corps Combat Development Command, Quantico, Virginia. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in economics. He has also earned master's degrees in international relations and management and supervision. He is a graduate of the Army Special Warfare School, Amphibious Warfare School, Marine Corps Command and Staff College, and National War College. General Zinni has held command and staff positions worldwide. In his first general officer assignment, he served as the Deputy Director of Operations at the U.S. European Command. In 1991, he served as the Chief of Staff and Deputy Commanding General of Combined Task Force Provide Comfort during the Kurdish relief effort in Turkey and Iraq. He also served as the military coordinator for Operation Provide Hope, the relief effort for the former Soviet Union. During 1992 to 93, he served as the Director for Operations for the United Task Force Somalia for Operation Restore Hope. Also in 1993, he served as the Assistant to the U.S. Special Envoy to Somalia. Please join me in welcoming General Zinni to the Armed Forces Staff College.
Where's Mike Maurer? Is he hiding down here? Mikey. You never did sit up front, even when I knew you for real. But my intent today is to give you a flavor for these operations other than war, and kind of focus on what I think is remarkably different about these operations from what we normally go through in planning and making decisions and carrying out combat operations, our primary role. I've been involved in 4 operations to some degree or another that could be categorized as operations other than war: humanitarian interventions, peace operations, that sort of thing. And I think with each operation I was able to walk away with a few more things that I saw consistently happening, enough to be categorized as trends. I think I would have told you after the first operation that we can handle these things without any special kind of training or emphasis in our professional military education, but I've backed off of that after the 4th time. I do think that these are so remarkably different in a number of ways, especially when it comes to the planning and the decision-making and the interaction with the other things that are happening, the humanitarian and political side, so remarkably different that we do need to think about them and apply a decision process in a different way. Now, let me begin by giving you a little grocery list of some of the non-traditional, which seems to be the operative term these days, non-traditional kinds of tasks that I've experienced. I've experienced in Somalia having to establish a police force and having to be put nominally in charge of that police force because it was a UN requirement to, in effect, become the Frank Rizzo of Mogadishu. Now, my only qualification is I am from Philadelphia, but that's and I am Italian, but that's the sum total of my abilities and talents regarding the establishment of police forces. I also learned that there are some U.S. laws regarding U.S. military establishing national police forces that require you to be very careful in what you're doing. The necessity for the police force was there. We didn't foresee it. We didn't plan to do it, certainly, from the Unified Task Force perspective, but it needed to be done. And we were merrily going about our way establishing a police force. We were very proud of what we were doing. The police force was well received by the people. It was respected even before. Klan and militia bias didn't affect it that much. It seemed that the old policemen coming back and assuming their position on the streets was having a positive effect on the people in the area. So we wanted to start this, and we couldn't get the UN to do it for whatever reason, so we initiated it. What we didn't realize, of course, is that policemen tend to arrest people, and they tend to want to know what to do with the people they arrest. So we then got into developing a prison system and a jail system, and creating or recreating or reestablishing jails and prisons. Some of them were Connex boxes with bars on them. Some of them were more elaborate prison complexes that had existed before that we helped rehab and set up a means of feeding and providing for the prisoners. Pretty soon the police came and said, we have arrested people, we have prisoners, what do we do with them now? Oh, well, we need a judiciary system. So we established a judiciary committee, and found a bunch of old Somali judges and dusted them off and brought them out and said, "You're now judges. Go forth and try cases," and got plenty of prisoners. And they said, "What law is it you would like us to use or apply in here?" And we hadn't thought about that too much, and staff judge advocates and I got together, and our staff judge advocate said, "There's a neat little old Italian code here that they used to use. Sounds pretty good." And went back to my 16 years of Catholic education, recognized some Latin phrases in there that seemed legal enough, and that looked good. So we established a judiciary committee, a set of judges. We had a law in place, a prison system, police. We were ready to go. We had our first murder case, and the judge eventually found the guy guilty and decided on execution as a sentence, and decided the execution ought to be carried out that night outside the courtroom, and decided one of our policemen should do it. So he dutifully checked out his weapon and took the guy out and shot him 7 times in the street, left him in the mud on a rainy night out in the Australian sector where this occurred in Baidoa, and justice seemed served. Well, by now, our staff judge advocate had screwed himself into the ceiling and thought we'd better back off a little bit from all this, and we're getting carried away. I've been involved twice with resettling refugees. Now, if you ever want to see a bureaucracy, you deal with the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, Madame Ogata and her crew, on resettling of refugees. It isn't easy. I've learned that if you're going to beat feet and leave town, cross a border. You're better off. Don't stay inside a border, because then you're just a displaced person and you don't get all the bennies that come with being a refugee. Processing refugees and moving them is more involved in getting a Virginia driver's license, and that I thought was the ultimate in bureaucracy. And you have to account for these people every inch of the way. And they have to sign 52 forms explaining that they're doing this of their own will, and you have to provide way stations to ensure that there's security for them, that there's caring for the well-being. In accounting for every one of them, you run into problems. The little suckers tend to die, give birth, and your numbers get all screwed up. And of course, as military guys, we don't like screwed up numbers. With the Kurds, I remember we couldn't just bring them down into a nice military temporary camp that we built with nice lined up tents, everything very military, very organized. Kurds don't like to live that way. They live in bajirs, which are their communities, inside of which they have zozans, their villages, and little guns, their neighborhoods, which have to have all the shelters and buildings facing inboard and all the head facilities facing away from Mecca, but there has to be a certain layout. So we were into building little Levitt towns with little cul-de-sacs all throughout northern Iraq to temporarily house the Kurds. And this became a very, very trying and difficult effort. As they get there, as Somalis get there, as Kurds get there, and others that I've experienced, they have to get their little starter kits, a couple of goats, some seeds, got to make sure they're off in the right direction in life. And for military guys, basic infantrymen like myself, this is all new experience. You encounter, as I did in Provide Comfort and I did in Somalia, the requirement to be a negotiator and a diplomat. Now, twice in my life, I put on a three-piece suit and was seconded to an ambassador. Ambassador Oakley in the latter stages of Somalia, and Ambassador Armitage when we went into the former Soviet Union on Operation Provide Hope. And I learned how you have to get involved in negotiating for release of prisoners, negotiating ceasefires, negotiating disarmament, negotiating economic issues. When I was in the Soviet Union with Armitage, he had me in dialogue with the Minister of Finance and Minister of Social Protection on monetization issues. Now, I have a Bachelor of Economics. I got to tell you, it was a gentlemanly C from Villanova, just enough to get me my commission in the Marine Corps. I don't remember a damn thing that I studied, and I thought a convertible ruble was a Russian car. I had no idea that what I was doing in there, but if any of you know Armitage, you don't give him any excuses. He's bigger than any three of us in here, and you just get your mission and you go off and do it, and he doesn't want to hear about your specialization or your inability to do Windows. In Somalia, we got involved with 15 political factions in negotiating ceasefire and disarmament. Some of the colonels and Mike Mauer's little future plan cell there had to send back and have their wives send them their uniform or their civilian clothes because their chocolate chips wouldn't do, as they went off to Addis Ababa and sat around with the 15 factions and began to negotiate ceasefire, disarmament agreements, and other political things. I use this as a little short list. Now, I could add a lot more. I can add in having on your staff a member of the Communicable Disease Center, Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, when the biggest thing in your life is trying to stop cholera epidemics and measles, when you have to learn about well baby care, when in the hills of northern Iraq you have to establish an OBGYN pediatrics clinic because the Kurds had 70% of the females of childbearing age pregnant in the hills, and that became the biggest thing in your day, is how we're going to care for all these mothers throwing babies in the backs of your helicopters as they're coming in, dropping off food because they don't think they could care for them, and every helicopter's coming back with a couple of kids in the back who we can't figure out who they belong to, and we've got them. I can tell you about trying to deal with providing information, running a PSYOPs organization that publishes a newspaper every day, runs a radio station, drops leaflets, and the biggest headache you have is in engaging and getting the translations right, make sure what's being said and put out is compatible with what's actually going on the ground, countering anti-U.S. UN rhetoric that's coming across one of the warlords' radio stations, making sure the message that we put out are right, are consistent, are accurate, are the right themes, that we understand the right target audiences, and you become really the media czar in these areas. Now, these are all really non-traditional kinds of missions, especially if you think of them as primary missions. I mean, these are the points of main effort. These are, at given times, the major focus in these kinds of operations. These operations are characterized in the beginning with something that starts us off in the military in the wrong way, and that's a fuzzy or vague mission. We have a military mindset that begins by taking a mission, analyzing it, drawing from it specified or implied tasks, and then going about our military requirements to meet those tasks. Never, ever do you get a mission that you can deal with in that manner. The missions are vague, they're fuzzy, whatever the conditions are that got you in there quickly either changed on the ground or weren't relevant or applicable to begin with. Your ability to distill military tasks from these political objectives just isn't there. I've never seen it. And you look at some of the tasks that are being put out now, or military objectives. Let me give you one. I've just read in Bosnia, for example, Vance Owen plan and other plans after that said that the military will monitor heavy weapons. Now, who in this room can tell me what monitor heavy weapons means to the military? You want me to blow them up? You want me to capture them? You want me to put them in a cantonment and make sure that nobody uses them, even though they can provide their own people in there to guard them or to keep possession of them? You want me to watch them shoot and tell you that they shot and who shot? But what did the diplomat mean by monitor? And how did he envision that would be translated down to military action? When we left Somalia, UNITAF, after 5 months, and UNISOM II came in, there was a stated political objective by the UN and the U.S. policymakers that said they intended to, and I quote, marginalize, isolate, and minimalize the warlords. Now, I can go to my JCS Pub 1 and look up marginalize, isolate, and minimalize. Does that mean I shoot them? Does that mean I capture them? Does that mean I chase them out of town? But what does that mean? In effect, it never got translated into military action, except by General Adid, who understood what it meant, understood that we were deciding he was the enemy. And of course, we picked the wrong guy, picked an enemy we didn't need to make, and went about things in a very heavy-handed way. The incident in the 5th of June in trying to inspect the authorized weapons storage sites and the radio stations, complete disaster. Sometimes missions are given that the policymakers or the political decision makers don't understand the implications on the ground. Let me give you two again. I'll take you to Somalia. One is the damn radio station that Adid ran. Now, I got to tell you, the radio station was a mild pain in the butt at best and never exceeded anything more than that. The only people that listened to his radio station were American intel officers, you know. Certainly no self-respecting Somali listened to it. Occasionally American diplomats, too, because they're the only ones that got excited or hyper over the radio station. Our radio station, Rajo, which means hope in Somali, put out anti-Adid stuff when he put out anti-UNITAF, UN, or US stuff. And I would get summoned to his compound, and he would rant and rave about Rajo. There's another Somali word which means trouble, which sounds like Rajo, and that's what we would call it, radio trouble. And I said, General, you know, if you would lower your rhetoric, we'll lower our rhetoric. He did, we did. You know, the end of the story. That's about the way we carried on business in our time there. If that radio station were used in a hostile manner as a command and control facility to incite violence, that's one thing. But I couldn't get too excited about the radio station. We were being pressured to take out the radio station, physically destroy it. And my problem with that is we're not here to make enemies. We're here to set the right example. We're here to teach them about democracy and self-determination. And the first thing Americans want to do is take out a radio station because we don't like what's said. We could burn the library there in Mogadishu if they had one, if we don't like what's written. That's sure teaching them the right way to go about recovery and establishing a democratic government. But that's what happened. That's what the American policymakers certainly influenced UNISOM too into doing. And they were openly vocal about wanting to take this out. That's why the misunderstanding when the Pakistanis went in, a confrontation at the radio station, a couple of Somalis are killed. Next thing you know, people pour out into the streets, and there's a so-called deliberate ambush, which is impossible if you know the facts, on the Pakistanis. It wasn't a deliberate ambush. It was a spontaneous reaction by the people who thought they were under attack and were about to be subjected to eradication, their political faction and their clan. And so what happens is something like this radio station then becomes a flashpoint or a catalyst for violence. You create an enemy you don't need. Let me take another issue. When we went into Somalia, UNITAF, our mission said, provide a secure environment for this humanitarian operation that's gone on. Now, we understood, or we translated the task from this down to how we would physically provide that secure environment. The UN, Boutros Ghali, saw it another way. He saw that a secure environment could only be achieved if we physically disarmed the Somalis. And that led him to say that he would not take over from UNITAF as either implied or promised to the Bush administration until that had occurred. Consequently, when we went in and thought we were only going for a month or so, we went in on the 9th of December, thought we'd be out by the 20th of January or beginning of February. And of course, you get into the dreaded stabilization phase, which is just a euphemistic way of saying we completed our mission, but nothing's happened, and so we just mark time here. So you have to call it something. So every operation I've been in, we call it the stabilization phase, and it lasts forever till somebody figures how the hell to get you out, or somebody screws up and then you gotta leave. We go into this stabilization phase, and he keeps insisting on physically disarming the Somalis. And there's pressure from our government and political decision makers about, gee, don't you think you guys might want to physically disarm them? Isn't that a good idea? Shouldn't we disarm Somalis? Well, let me give you the perspective of the guy on the ground. First of all, arms in Somalia, weapons in Somalia is like crack cocaine on the streets of Washington, D.C. I don't have a clue how much is there, but I'm sure it's a lot. And if I took some out, I couldn't tell you if I'm doing well or not. No clue. And I'm sure that if we have a good rainy season in Somalia, the trees are going to sprout AK-47s because they're buried everywhere. You know, and I know that for sure that if I go house to house, building to building, and attempt to take weapons in that manner, physically disarm Somalis, two things are going to happen. I'm going to piss off the Somali people, and I'm going to take casualties while killing a lot of Somalis in the process. Now, is that what you want me to do? And when I get the weapon, what do I have? Do I have Mohammed's little AK-47 under his mattress that he protects his goat herd and his wife and kids with? If I find this big arms cache, what have I got? I've got a cache that belongs to the militia of a clan or a political faction, and now by taking that cache, are they now vulnerable to attack by rivals? Are they now ostracized from any process of resolution or follow-on government because they no longer have a power base or a means to protect themselves? So what do you gain by disarmament, by going in and physically doing it? We were attempting to get a political decision to disarm, willing disarmament. We, in fact, got all 15 factions to sign a ceasefire and disarmament agreement. We took them to Addis Ababa and had them sign it. We left UNISOM, too, with this agreement and a plan for implementation, transition camps for their militia, where they can come through and be retrained and give up their weapons. At the same time, creating national police forces and small, lightly armed militia to take their place and reestablish security and help counterbalance their influence as we train them up. A plan the UN really wanted no part of, because they really wanted to get into this physical disarmament. It seemed right. And all these guys were warlords, the operative term. Two big mistakes in thinking that you can marginalize warlords. One is the term marginalize, which sounds very, very nice, very, very sanitary, very, very political. Marginalized to an Adid or an Ali Mahdi or a Yusuf or a Morgan or one of these warlords means you have made me the enemy. You have decided to take me out of a process that I rightfully belong into. I was at the State Department 2 days ago, and one of our brilliant State Department folks who was in favor of this marginalization of the warlord said, "You don't understand, General. When we say marginalize, we didn't intend to make this break out into military confrontation. We wanted to effect a political marginalization of Adid." I said, that's all well and good if Adid cooperates with that and understands it. That he stands up and says, well, let me get this straight now. I'm a general, a legitimate general, trained in Odessa, trained in Rome, a general of the Somali army, very successful in the Ogaden War, respected by my men, by my officers, the only one with tactical successes in the Ogaden War. I'm the chairman of the largest political faction in Somalia, the Somali National Alliance. I was a statesman in my own right, a member of Siad Barre's cabinet, ambassador to India for 6 years. I'm intelligent, articulate, well-educated. I'm the leader in my clan, which is one of the major clans now in power, and a member of the largest clan family, which is definitely in power, and at odds with his fellow family clansman, Ali Mahdi. I am the one who beat Siad Barre twice, defeated him. I mean, I am viewed by some of my constituents as the George Washington of Somalia. I suffered 6 years imprisonment under this dictator, lived in a hole in the ground, read nothing but the Quran, but fought him, much like, you know, I'm the Mandela of my country to some people. And you tell me now, when you come cruising in, Mr. Boutros-Ghali, Mr. Jonathan Howe and all, that I'm to be marginalized. I own the largest militia force and military. I hold some claim to the remnants of the Somali army. I've got control of more area than any other faction leader, militia leader, clan leader. And you're telling me now you have decided that I can't participate in where Somalia goes and in the government, and I'm to be marginalized. And it surprised the UN and the U.S. policymakers that he actually had the gall to fight over this, you know? So, I mean, I think from the perspective of the ground, on the ground, you can see that policymakers at a distance have a problem coming to grips with reality. What scares me about Bosnia is NATO, the UN, and a heavy U.S. commitment with the popular support and sentiment here said we aren't sending troops unless we lead. I mean, I don't think we can get away with subordinating U.S. troops to any other kind of organization, perhaps NATO, because it may be viewed by the American people that it really is American-led, with Zach Ure and the 4-star Navy Admiral and Naples running the operation. There's nothing wrong with us being subordinated militarily. There's nothing wrong with us working for especially other NATO nations and many other nations in this world's military. But I'm here to tell you, I just don't think the American people are going to buy it. I just don't think any president can put U.S. troops under command of other than a U.S. commander. Now, can it be layered down below? There's an ultimate U.S. commander, maybe 3 layers down. There's some battalion that's working for a brigade of another nation. I think that could work. I think in the NATO architecture it could work. But I don't think it's going to work otherwise. Nothing militarily wrong with it. And if you try to throw the fig leaves and throw this magic military BS up of OPCON, TACON, all this crap, I don't think that Joe Blow down in the 7-Eleven in Peoria is going to buy it. You know, that's not what the Constitution says, and that's not why he elected a commander-in-chief. And he isn't going to have those decisions being made. Is he wrong in feeling that way? If you put a battalion of Fijians on a street corner, good chance are most people won't notice. Put a battalion of Americans on that street corner, where do you think the Molotov cocktails, the demonstrations, and the theater is going to occur? Where those Americans are. If you run a little convoy down the road, and that convoy has Fijian security, and a little ragtag militia group comes out, a bunch of old ladies and some guys with AK-47s, and says, this convoy with these tanks can go no further until you pay me money, give me food, and I won't let you go down there and help them, my enemy. And like good peacekeepers, not wanting to make enemies, not wanting to have a confrontation at that point, these Fijians dutifully say, okay, we'll back off now, we'll send some people up to talk to you, let's negotiate our way through this, and we'll come back a couple of days. Unnoticed, smart move, intelligent way to go about business, smart peacekeeping. Now let's put American troops down there and you go whiz-banging down. And you get stopped by this little ragtag outfit, and you elect to back off. What's the Washington Post and the New York Times going to say? American military embarrassed, America is intimidated, foreign policy failure, inability to deliver food. Employing American troops and understanding all the baggage we bring, I think, is important for American commanders to understand, and others may not understand that. And that's why Americans end up in situations like in Somalia, in a U.S.-led, U.S. forces only, U.S. commanded only, nobody in the chain of command and the chain of information, and we're out there hunting so-called warlords through the streets of Mogadishu, and the American people are saying, what in the hell's going on? And then we say, it's a UN operation, you know. Come on, you know. I mean, I read a statement by the Secretary of State that said, well, those guys that conducted the operation on the 3rd of October were peacekeepers. They were there for humanitarian reasons. A lot of those guys are friends of mine. They aren't peacekeepers, and they weren't there for any humanitarian reasons. Those guys on the 3rd of October, as General Adid said, they are very dangerous people. I said, yes, they are, you know, and they were sent there for one purpose and one purpose only. How did we get to doing that if we are not controlling events and we are not leading the military operation? In Somalia, on the ground in Mogadishu, when I went back with Ambassador Oakley to negotiate the release of Warrant Officer Durant and Omar Shantilli with the Nigerian soldier with General Adid, when we got there, Oakley said, as we go out into Mogadishu, hairy enough with Adid's security, being our security in the middle of town, it'd be nice if no one fast ropes on our head while we're talking to Adid and his militia. How about making sure, Zinni, that we've shut down any potential military operations out here? And that wasn't easy, because there was a unilateral ceasefire on Adid's part, no reciprocal agreement on anybody else's part. So as I went merrily along making sure that we shut down all these operations, I found there were 4 separate military chains of command. I mean, they didn't come together, certainly anywhere in the Horn of Africa, let alone on a continent. And the principle of war, unity of command, had escaped me as, I guess, being applicable. I shut down 4 operations. I didn't realize that no one was paying attention to the PSYOPs campaign, and that wasn't connected to anything operationally, because while we were out there talking to Adid and his people, little leaflets floated down that said Adid is a criminal and a crook and deserves to be hanged. And, you know, at a delicate point in the negotiations, we didn't need this, and disregarded general bad translation. You know, we can move on to other things. The important thing in these operations is not to make an enemy. Don't make an enemy. If you decide you're going to make an enemy, and I have a countryman by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli that once advised the prince, don't ever do your enemy a small harm. Slam dunk him if he's your enemy. And, you know, I thought Niccolo had it right. We either have an enemy or we don't. Don't talk about marginalizing people. Don't talk about monitoring heavy weapons. You know, I can't understand this airstrike business. Let me get this straight. This guy shoots when we told him not to shoot. And then what we do is we tell him that we'll attack him when he shoots, which means he has the initiative, he has the momentum, he controls the tempo. In other words, when he pulls the lanyard is when the action starts. So he can pick the time and place when the action's going to occur. Yes. And then we're only going to attack those things that shot. So he knows everything else that didn't shoot. He can continue moving around and everything else. We're just going to shoot the things that shot. And let me get this straight. What we're out to kill, this organization that shot, that's now ringed with air defense weapons, since he knows that's where we're coming from, and that's in fact what the Serbs are doing. When we go after that, we're going to kill the corporals and PFCs that pull lanyards, you know, and pull triggers. We're going to shoot arrows out of the air and let the archers sit back there. Now, that's a tough concept for me to grasp. I told the people at the State Department there are two questions you need to ask when you employ the military. The first is, the military people are going to want to know, what is it exactly you want me to do? What is it exactly I'm supposed to accomplish on these airstrikes or in this marginalization process or whatever it is? What is it exactly? And if you don't know, let's sit down and work it out. Let's take this term and say, in a military term, this means neutralize, destroy, this means blow up, this means capture. Let me give you some military words and tasks to put with this nice, smooth, sanitary, diplomatic-sounding task or objective that you frame. The second question that has to be asked after what is it you want me to do, the most important question in all these operations is the and then what? After you get there, after you do what this guy thinks you're going to do, after you run this airstrike, after you feed 500,000 or 2 million or whatever it is, after you stabilize the area, and then what? After you invade Haiti, destroy the army, and then what? Is there a ship coming on D+20 that I pack up and get on? Is there a UN force that we have a commitment to that's going to replace us? I went off to Operation Provide Comfort on April 11th, 1991. The mission was to conduct 10 days worth of airdrops to support the Kurds in the Judy Mountains on the border of northern Iraq and Turkey. April 11th, 10-day operation. Today, Provide Comfort is still going on. It's the ever-ready rabbit, like all these operations are. On December 9th, 1993, or we went off for Operation Restore Hope. Out by Inauguration Day. All you got to do is jumpstart the term we heard, the operation. The UN will come back in a more robust operation. They're already on the ground. You have to get into all these areas, about half the size of the state of Texas, and start the delivery of food. 17 days after we got there, we had accomplished our mission. Decided it's a good idea to have a little bit of stabilization. Give it a month. Definitely a month later, definitely by the 20th of January, it was accomplished. The stated mission, the task that we drew and out of it and briefed everybody on, there ain't nobody there coming and getting us. No UN force coming in, no end to that operation. That operation finally ended by Congress and the American people forcing the president and us to withdraw. Over a year later. These operations tend to start out okay, or to start out well-intentioned, but the classic case of understanding how you're getting out, what the end state conditions are, and whether they're even relevant and what they mean. Because you get to the end state conditions and you say we've achieved them, and you brief them, and they're on the butcher paper and they're on the briefing slides, but you're still there in the dreaded stabilization phase that lasts forever. Let me switch hats to you and talk about your partners in all this. Coalition operations. These things attract a lot of people that want to play for all kinds of different reasons and motivations. They come and span the spectrum from forces that are highly skilled, like our brother Canadians in these kinds of operations that understand the nature of these operations, have a long history and experience in these kinds of operations, to those that are seeking to participate for reasons other than humanitarian or willingness to provide some sort of coalition resolution to the problem at hand. It may be that they want to participate with us because they want to gain credibility and respect for the military, help a demoralized military regain some sense of purpose, show that they can work side by side with us because down the road it'll let them get into NATO or some other security arrangement with us. So there are millions of motivations that could lead someone to this. UN peacekeeping is a good business. There are militaries around the world that support their entire military structure through UN peacekeeping. It's a good deal for small countries, and they become career peacekeepers. I met an officer from a country that had spent the last 7 years of his life on U.S. peacekeeping duty, and he was collecting one paycheck for every year. He was explaining to me how he got 7 paychecks, all tax-free. Good deal. And had been twice promoted in his nation's service, beyond which he would have been promoted had he just taken a normal course and remained in the military and didn't have this option for a second career in UN peacekeeping. Coalitions come and are formed oftentimes on scene. What you hope you get as a commander or planner is a force that is compatible. Compatible meaning that politically we're in the same direction. Now, you're not going to find political uniformity. You're not going to find everybody with exactly the same political purpose for being there. But you would hope that your purposes for being there don't conflict or rub up against each other. And this can happen. You can find yourself in a region with a former colonial power whose reason for being there might be a little different than your purpose. You can find forces in there that are quietly supporting one or more factions while you're trying to maintain the vision or the impression of neutrality. You can find forces that come in that their countries politically are after an end that is opposed to what you have stated, or after an end that's diametrically opposed to another coalition partner, the Kurds. There were elements of our coalition that felt the Kurds ought to be completely autonomous. There were others like the Turks that didn't think that was a good idea. And of course, they provided the bases and the infrastructure that we had to use to support the Kurds or get at northern Iraq. So you have to be careful about the political compatibility. There has to be some cultural compatibility in what you're doing, too. If there isn't, you could run into problems. If they're part of the problem, if they have sided with one force, if for religious or ethnic reasons they're viewed as pro one faction or the other, they may be in danger or may be a detriment. Military compatibility is a problem, which we call interoperability. Doctrinally, technically, and procedurally, it's got to come together in some form. If your philosophy of operating is totally different, and now we're pulling in forces from former Eastern Europe, former Soviet Union, former Warsaw Pact, whose basic philosophical way of doing business is different from ours. And the doctrine, tactics, techniques, and procedures have to be worked out. We come to the operation technically unable to interoperate. Our radios don't talk to each other. I mean, you bring in, as we did in Provide Comfort, 1,400 short tons of American comm equipment over and above our TOTE because we had to be able to provide interoperability in the backbone of command and control. Procedural interoperability. Be nice if the guy in your right flank and the guy in your left flank operating off the same rules of engagement you are. And I've been on a number of these operations where we don't. Some guys are much more liberal, some guys are much more conservative. The conditions upon which you shoot would be nice if they were consistent throughout the force. I'm under Chapter 6, I'm under Chapter 7, I shoot at hostile intent, I shoot only at hostile action. All those things interpret and wash out differently in the end. And the subtleties of that have to be worked out, especially if your organization is being clustered in small units. Now, nations come in with conditions of employment. As a director of operations in Somalia, I heard, I think, every possible condition there is to hear. My forces cannot engage in any heroic mission. And what the hell does that mean? We cannot either shoot nor be shot at. Well, that kind of limits what the hell we can do with you. I will require full logistic support. I must be positioned at this location and no other. My government insists this is where I must be positioned on the ground. I must have full medical support, and that must include medical malpractice insurance in case your doctor screws up one of my troops. I must have full pay for my troops, and I would like that pay sent to our capital directly, direct deposit. You know, I mean, we had a tough time with direct deposit. We're going to institute it for coalition countries. In Somalia, in Mogadishu, the international airfield was defended by the forces of 8 nations because it was threatened, because it was big, because that's as far as they could go. Out the back ramp of the airplane that got them there, and that's it. Either physically, out of a sense of willingness, or for political reasons, that's as far as they go. And so we had the most heavily populated, least defended airfield probably in the world. And then when you go down there and you see some of those units and you bring a VIP and they brief you, and the first page is, "This is my mission. My mission is to defend myself." Is there anything else under there? No. And you now have a self-licking ice cream cone, which serves no purpose. But somebody back in Washington or New York thinks more is better. So every day, and Mikey could tell you this, we would get faxed our little matrix of potential contributing countries. We were up to 44 when we left. 26 had actually shown up, usually unannounced, right at the airport. And you're trying to figure out what to do with these forces because of all these conditions of employment. Some of them won't help you out by logically subordinating their contribution to some larger force. Somebody rolls in with his 150-man medical unit or his 26-man truck detachment, and you'd say, you know, if I could take you and put you under this big brigade I've got here from this other nation, that would really work well. Huh. I cannot do that. I must report directly to the U.S.-led coalition command headquarters. And so if I showed you the wire diagram of the chain of command and how it worked, you'd see UNITAF or CTF or whatever I've had in some of these operations, and then 50 million little blocks. Some of these 20-man detachments, 5,000-man brigade, 100-man truck company, you know, 3,500-man combined arms unit. It makes no sense. And the lines that come down. I had an embarrassing question in Provide Comfort by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said, the lines in your command chart, the command relationships, what are they? OPCON, TACON, command. Sir, we don't ask, because no one can sign up to any of that stuff. Well, how do you do business? HandCon, you know? That's it. No memoranda of agreement, no memoranda of understanding. You know, if the guy, Mikey brought a bottle of champagne to start off the operation, we consumed that on the first day before we left. It was probably the best thing we did. It was the only thing that could get us focused on how to do business in this environment. But the relationships are worked out on the scene, and they aren't pretty. And you don't really want to try to capture them for an audience like this, distill them and say, as you go off in the future, you're going to have this sort of command relationship. Some guy comes in as a senior commander, as a national commander, and he brings with him his forces. His forces are passed to you to use in a way that he agrees upon. We sit down quietly, and we engage in a little discussion as to how we might use those forces, what kinds of missions, tasks, positions on the ground we can give them. And through a consultative handshake process, they agree to do it. We don't change that unless there is a quiet, behind-the-scenes consultative process that takes place. If you naively think, like UNISOM II did, that you're going to go off and tell the Italians, I've changed your mission. You now go from this sort of peacekeeping mission and you're going to go downtown with your tanks and shoot up and become a quick reaction force, and hey, I'm checking with Rome. That's not in my charter. You know, and you wonder why. I mean, the military way is, I got more stars than you. I tell you what to do, and you do it. Not in these operations it doesn't happen. I mean, it is hand-con, and that's the way it works. It is consultative. It is behind the scenes. You don't embarrass any coalition partner. You don't give them a mission or an order that hasn't been well greased beforehand. Now, the logical point is, well, what if you get into an emergency? What if you need reinforcements? What if you need a quick reaction force? What if you need a reserve? What if you need fire support to help somebody out? What you usually do is find one or two nations that are willing to provide that up front, prearranged, pre-agreed, are willing to actually operate under those conditions and use them. Let me give you another point of consideration. One is intelligence. Our intelligence system is designed to support a Cold War kind of operation. We are order of battle oriented. We are there to IPB the battlefield. Report all this data to me, let me lay it out, let me template it, and I'll tell you you're facing the 3rd Combined Arms Army, the 1st Squad of the 5th Platoon, or whatever. That's the mentality and approach we have. It is designed to examine an enemy. It is designed to break down that enemy, to show you how he's disposed, how he's positioned, what his intentions are. It doesn't fit here. It just doesn't seem to work in these kinds of operations. There is no physical enemy, and you're trying not to make one. And if there are disparate groups out there that you can affect confrontation with, they aren't organized, they aren't monolithic. We can't think in terms of the general IDs having positive control over some organization that lends itself to block charts and diagrams. That's not the way it works. What we need is cultural intelligence. What I need to understand is how these societies function. What makes them tick? Who makes the decisions? What is it about their society that's so remarkably different in their values, in the way they think, than the way I do in my Western white man mentality, which has absolutely zero applicability in here, and yet is going to drive everything I do, my decision making. That in my military way of MET and T, and my way of building my synchronization matrix, and my top-down planning, my battlefield geometry is absolutely worth zip in this environment, where the enemies are abstract, where it's starvation, anarchy, disorder, where the problems you're going to face have nothing to do with military operations. They're a small piece, secondary to everything else, where the situations you're going to be faced with go far beyond what you're trained for in a very narrow military sense. They become cultural issues, issues of traumatized populations' welfare, food, shelter, issues of government, issues of cultural, ethnic, religious problems, historical issues, economic issues that you have to deal with that aren't part of the MET-T process necessarily. And that rigid military thinking can get you in trouble. What you need to know isn't what our intel apparatus is geared to collect for you and to analyze and to present to you. An assumption going in that you know what's best for them, that you're trying to implant Jeffersonian democracy ultimately. Jefferson, Locke, Rousseau all have one thing in common in a place like Somalia. They're 3 dead white men. You know. End of discussion. So try to implant their theories by all us great Western nations, and you might have a little problem. If you don't understand the tribal structure of the Kurds, if you don't understand who Chaldeans are and Assyrian Christians and Uzbekis and Azeris, if you don't understand Habagidar and Isak and Abgals, if you don't understand the complexity of the clans and their interrelationships in Somalia, you're in trouble. If you don't understand that there is no concept of individual responsibility in Somalia, you wouldn't do a stupid thing like put an arrest warrant on Adid and a $25,000 reward in his head. You have declared war on his clan. Only the clan can accept responsibility. And if they do, they pay a diya, a blood tax, in payment of a wrong that they have accepted as a wrong that they committed or a member of their clan committed. When you go fight them then, why is it that the women and kids are out in the street committing atrocities on American bodies? Because you went at war with the Klan. You declared war in the Klan. You're there to eradicate the Klan. Your enemy is Habagidar. And when you go to war with the Klan, the whole Klan fights. And you can't understand that in a Western context or a Western view of the world. Because what you're out to collect and what your decision process is all about is alien to that particular environment. Now, in the time we've had, I tried to touch on some of the things different about the nature of these operations. There are many, many more. There are areas in planning and on the operational side that I think are unique, that I haven't touched on. There are functions like logistics that are unique, that you have to do slightly differently. There's the dealing with the media, which is entirely different in this environment than it is in a Desert Storm, in a Vietnam, or in a World War II or a World War I context, where you're out at war and it's a military operation, in effect in a declared combat situation. Everything that seems to happen requires a different approach, a different mindset, a different way of doing business. Now, for the young sergeant, soldier, sailor, airman, Marine on the street, his life isn't much different. There are techniques that he needs to specialize in. It's important that he be highly disciplined, highly restrained, that the small unit leadership be highly effective. It's more important that in combat operations he be kept highly informed. He's going to be dealing with some difficult situations. He's going to be dealing with cultures and so immersed in them that are so remarkably different from his, it's going to be hard to understand. He's going to have a difficulty understanding why he's feeding this kid and his brother's throwing rocks at him, and his perspective has to be maintained. But basically, his world is not much different than the way it would be in combat. The pressures and the techniques are altered, and maybe some of the training needs to be oriented to emphasize some of that, but we don't need to create different kinds of forces. And that's a controversial point, but I don't believe that. But at your level and on to my level, we need to think and approach this differently. The planning process, the decision-making process, the thinking process is remarkably different. You need to be much broader based in your knowledge. You need to be much more flexible in your thinking. You've got to be prepared to take things that all your life have been completely logical, that if you do A and B, it logically leads to C, and understand that it does not apply. You may have to think entirely differently about cultures, about history, about the effects of the environment, and about the given situation you're in that will lead you to do things that you would never arrive at in a way of a decision using your normal logical thinking process, either your military process of making decisions or one you use day to day based on your culture and your upbringing. Doesn't apply. Okay, what I hope to convey to you is that this is, one, remarkably different, and two, it is the wave of the future. If von Prevald is right in its transformational war, if Bill in his fourth generation warfare, if what Toffler's writing about and Kaplan's writing about, if it's a new world out there, a new world of disorder, and the disorder and the conflict is going to come from these kinds of things, not only internationally but domestically. The Hurricane Hugos, the Hurricane Andrews, the LA riots, the floods, the fires, aging infrastructure on fault lines, in old city infrastructure that's falling apart, on floodplains, along physical faults in the earth that are going to crumble and destroy an economy that isn't there to repair it and fix it, a society that's in a form of malaise as a result, crime is rampant, anarchy we're on the verge of in places. The mission you and I get now isn't 2 MRCs, and it isn't going off to fight the big one nice and clean, end it with some sanitary standoff weapon system that we can put through the porthole, of a command bunker. It's going to be this messy kind of stuff. And you can't ignore it, you can't get away from it. And you are going to earn your paycheck in this. Okay, I'm yours for questions if you have any. Depending on, did I run over in time? I'm not sure where we are.
Get 20 minutes for questions. Run her into the podium.
Okay. Question.
Major Shaw, Seminar
Yeah.
10. Sir, how do we distill the experience of commanders like yourself and other people who have participated so that as we engage in contingencies, activities like the ones you've been telling us about in the future, we can avoid some of the pitfalls, but we can also be proactive and make some of the right decisions when the time comes?
Well, I think we're starting that now. We have enough of these under our belt to realize two things. They're here, they're going to involve the military, and we need to get in there and figure out what's different about these kinds of operations. All the services, in a joint way, with certain services in the lead, are beginning to put out these sorts of things. Capture the lessons learned, put the manuals on the street, write the doctrine. There's an interagency interest in this. State Department, the people that come in and play on the humanitarian side, the relief workers, the associations of the private relief organizations and everything, keep seeing how we never quite get it totally right. Can we do it better? How do we cooperate on the ground? What are the right relationships? What are the right agencies we need to put in place? If you're going to find a whole new world, for example, in humanitarian operations with these private voluntary organizations or non-governmental organizations, these NGOs. We had 50 of them in northern Iraq. We had 60 in Somalia. I understand there are 120 of them in Bosnia and in former Yugoslavia. And let me tell you, they're disparate organizations. They come from all over the world. And they answer to no one. There's no cohesive body or organization that pulls them together. Their charters oftentimes won't let them cooperate with the military. They often view the military as an adversary. Some of them, by their charter, can't get too close to any military organizations like the International Committee of the Red Cross because they have to maintain neutrality, and it has to be a highly visible neutrality. They deal with POWs and on both sides, and they can't be seen as accepting, say, even security openly from a given military source. Others, for religious reasons, may not be able to do that. Others for political reason or their standing. And you're going to find yourself out there trying to pull these disparate groups together. And we've kind of, this is just one way of answering your question in one area. We've experimented with things like a Civil Military Operations Center where we kind of bring their representatives together, ask them to form some sort of grouping or association that we can deal with so we can coordinate issues of logistic support, security, command and control. And a lot of them are resistant to that. They come in and go as they please and operate as they please in a lifestyle totally alien to good security and good common sense from our perspective. And there you are. I mean, I'm there dealing with the relief worker, and what goes through my mind is she is young, liberal, do-gooder, Peace Corps type, reminds me of my daughter and pisses me off. And she looks at me and she says, he is an old Neanderthal, reactionary, reminds me of my father and pisses me off. You know, and that's where you start out. So the cultures are different, even on that side. But that's one aspect of what you've got to learn. On the political side, the same thing. When there are dozens of ambassadors running around your area, Italian ambassadors, Egyptian ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors, UN special envoys, and they're all making little decisions and cutting deals that affect your life. And see, naively, this traumatized population that you're there to help or you're involved with or whatever kind of views us as a monolith that, well, there's a master plan behind all this confusion. I mean, obviously, all these guys running around are in cahoots, and they don't understand they're not. You know, and this political confusion, believe me, leads directly to your kind of confusion. One thing that troubled me about Bosnia is where in the hell are the political decisions going to be made? Brussels, where they have a political arm of NATO or a supervisory political committee. New York, because the UN is involved, and that's where they make their political decisions. Washington, where the biggest investment of troops and everything else, and the only superpower playing's in town, or all three places. Not to mention other nations' capitals that come in, and that's what happens on the ground. Physically on the ground, you can't lose sight of one thing: security of the force. Don't ever trick yourself into believing that everybody likes you and nothing can happen to you. Don't ever let your guard down. Will we repeat Beirut's? I mean, I was horrified at our approach to Haiti. You got to be kidding me. We go bobbing down there in a little LST with a bunch of engineers, some guys with, you know, MPs with 9mm. You send a military force in enough to get intimidated. Thank God they decided to not let them land. Once they landed, if they had done something, Then we would have had to have the embarrassment of pulling them out or reinforcing them and dribbling in, and then we start off on the wrong foot. If that's all the military force that was required, contract Brown and Root to do the damn job. When you put the military in, put the military in. I mean, the way to go into Haiti is the way you went into Panama. Let's change the situation in 24 hours and then start from there. Don't dribble military forces in, and don't put just enough in to get yourself in trouble, and don't put enough in to get intimidated. You shouldn't have military force in if you begin with that kind of thinking. But those are some of the lessons I think we pulled out of this. I think we're doing a better job of trying to come to grips with them at all levels, at all agencies. Policymakers, people that are on the ground doing the humanitarian side, and we in the military. I see it in the schools. I see it in the exercises and training that are happening. The Army is working down at their JRTC at Fort Chaffee, have run some exercises. Marines out on the West Coast have run an exercise where they invited in humanitarian relief agencies, State Department to participate in the workup and training for some of our forward deployed units. They're putting in packages that emphasize some of the techniques involved in these kinds of operations. The manuals are coming out, as I mentioned. In the PME schools like this, I mean, I find my calendar full of the war colleges, command and staff colleges that talk about these things. So the beginning of capturing these things. In all our lessons learned system, in the Marine Corps lesson learned system, in the Army call system, and each of the service and joint, the JULE system, more and more of this is coming back in, and people are getting access to them and trying to turn them into the tactics, techniques, procedures, and doctrine. It's beginning to be captured. And we won't necessarily capture it all right away, and we'll probably make some mistaken judgments in the interim. But we'll get there. Yes?
General Lieutenant Colonel Alwell, some people say this is all against the law, that unless it increases readiness, Title 10 says we can't do it, and that I would challenge you to say the troops that came into Somalia were better trained when they left for combat operations. The same in Bosnia, northern Iraq.
Yeah.
Do we need a change in the law, or do we need to get out of this business?
Well, we need to change the strategy. I understand your point. We have a military we're building on a military strategy that says 2 near simultaneous MRCs or whatever. Some of this stuff, some of it we can do additionally and maybe not endanger our ability to accomplish the military objectives in that military strategy. A lot of this, and you can't, you endanger that. So you need to change the strategy from the beginning and say the strategy is 2 MRCs plus. Then the chiefs of service and the SINCs and everybody else are able to concentrate on the training, organization, and equipping of forces able to do this. Now, let me go to the second part of your question. Were the troops that came out of Somalia better able to go to combat? In certain respects, yes. I will tell you that the Marines that were in Mogadishu can go to any urban area in the world after that and handle urban patrolling, urban operations after taking down a few compounds, involved in some night patrolling on the streets. Now, were they ready to go zipping off and jumping into APCs and tanks and do other things that had to be put aside because they weren't training? No. The Brits, when they train for Northern Ireland, go through a training program at a place called Leiden Heights. It's on the Dover coast. Their counterinsurgency center. It is the best concentrated training for this kind of thing. They take military units, airborne units, Royal Marines, all these sorts of units, and they come through this training and go to Northern Ireland for their 6-month deployment, come back, and then go back through their normal training. They're on a cycle, which doesn't take them out. Now, some of those skills, I've been through Leiden Heights, some of those skills are fantastically applicable to combat. But it's a narrow range of skills that they specialize in at the expense of other skills that they would work into, and and therefore they lose their broader capabilities, I feel, as we would if we specialized in this. If we go into Bosnia and we put units on the ground and we put units in there and they're working that narrow perspective of doing whatever they do there, the work up to that, the period that they're there, the little standout period after they come back, in effect, they're going to have skills that will atrophy that they might need in combat situations. Some certain skills they might actually increase. It'd be a mixed bag. Overall, there would be, over time, a definite decrease in readiness of those units. And overall, if these commitments become major, and we have a lot of them on the board, our ability to accomplish the strategy is even if we could do it now, which I doubt. I mean, even with the existing forces, I don't think we could do the strategy. I think there's certain areas like strategic lift and other things that aren't going to make it and stretch that far. And they get even more taxed in these situations. So your point's well taken. I don't think it requires a change in law, but a change in strategy. Double-barreled here.
Sir, I'm Major Winston. I'd like to get your views, see what you think about the State Department. Are they learning from your inputs, from your critiques? Are they getting any smarter in the use of our military?
Yeah. First of all, the answer is yes on both sides. We need to learn from them, too. I mean, there are times when the military takes in action not understanding the political ramifications. There is a bigger picture. There is an objective sometimes that you can lose sight of when you're down there in the grass and trying to do what's right on the ground. You can lose sight of a bigger political objective that's a valid one. So the education process has to work both ways. I will say this about our State Department. I've always seen high-quality people in the field. The ambassadors like Armitage, the ambassadors like Oakley, Ambassador Abramowitz, who was in Turkey when we worked the Kurdish relief operation. I've seen superb leaders in the field. Oakley, for example, felt it key to integrate the military and political sides very tightly. On the first day that we arrived, he came to us and said that he wanted to establish a connectivity that was so intermeshed that virtually we were in lockstep as we went on. Now understand, we answered a different change of commands. The commander, General Johnston, answered to the CENTCOM, and of course Ambassador Oakley's answering to the State Department back here or back in Washington. Let me explain some of the things he did on the ground. He wouldn't send a cable back to State Department without running it through us first. Consequently, we did the same thing. We didn't send messages back that were sort of overviews or situational updates or reports or opinions or views without showing Oakley first or getting him involved in it. Any discussions that my boss had with the SINC, he shared with Oakley. Any discussions Oakley had with the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, he shared with General Johnston. There was an agreement that our political advisor of UNITAF would also be Oakley's number 2 guy, his DCM. So in effect, we had another method of coordination. Oakley asked us to put some colonels on his staff. Matter of fact, he had a general as an advisor in the early stages of the operation, and then we moved several colonels down to the U.S. liaison office as part of his staff, sort of seconded them to him during the operation. We gave Oakley briefs every day on media business, on operations that occurred, on intelligence reports, so he was well up to snuff. His goings about handling things political, he always gave us that same kind of reciprocal briefing and back brief of what happened. The way we ran our operations is before we went into an area, we put eyes on target out there. We put, our reconnaissance and intelligence efforts on the ground. Oakley went in next to make contact with the political leadership, whether it was village elders, faction leaders, or whatever, to explain what we were there to do. We did a little bit of a short PSYOPs campaign with some leaflets and other things to explain the military force, how they're coming. And when the force came in, about 2 or 3 days after this process, it came in force, the road already prepared politically and every other way, and we came in with the humanitarian relief workers. And strangely enough, General Adid gave us this advice. He said, don't go out there with just guns or you're just another gun-toting faction. Go out there with food. So the first time they see you in force with your guns, there's also food and medicine, and they'll associate you as being with something different than the other militias and gun-toters. And he said, prepare the way. Don't surprise anyone so you can avoid conflict. If you go into an area unannounced and quickly in large numbers, someone may not understand why you're there, may not understand what your purpose is, and then you get in a confrontation that you didn't need. So in taking that advice, we prepared this, but it showed the interoperability with the State Department. They are very interested in trying to understand the ground commander's perspective. They are very interested in trying to find more of a sense of cooperation and things like this, and to formalize it, to kind of get the interagency tactics, techniques, and procedures down as to how we should do business this way. So the answer to your question is yes, I see a strong willingness to understand and learn. I see a strong willingness on their part, too, to help us understand where they come from and how they operate and the different culture and nature that exists with diplomats that are over there in their kinds of business that we aren't used to. Back there was another question?
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Quadros, you mentioned, sir, questions on the fact of the problems caused by cultural differences and things of that nature. We are told that the draft and national security strategy has as one of its pillars something called democratization. Could you shed some light on democratization, and how do you see that playing out, the kinds of operations you've been talking about today?
Well, you know, certainly I'm no political science major, but I got to tell you, I was involved in initial contact with the initial military-to-military contacts with Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. And I got sent over for the first contacts with the Russian army. And the purpose was for us to teach them about how a military functions in a democracy. And us was a group of Western generals, NATO generals, we're going to teach them this stuff. And we go cruising in. Moscow received us with open arms. Marshal Shapashnikov, all the way down to Cadet Vladimir somebody who was my escort. They had the full array, laid out all their warts in the military, and says, we're ready to learn about democracy. So we got up to give them a series of lectures on democracy. And the first guy up was, I think, a Dutchman. And he started to tell them why their military needs to be unionized, because it's the only way it can function in a democracy. And they took plenty of notes, and we stood up and said, don't unionize your military. It's the worst thing you can do. It'll never work. Your democracy won't work. And they said, okay, you've confused us. So we said, there's democracy and there's democracy, you know. So my problem is, when we are going to get into the democratization of the world, we better understand, one, will it work everywhere, and will it work in generally the forms that we know it? Let me use another term, self-determination. Now, if that self-determination manifests itself in some form of democracy, maybe it ain't pretty, and it's got a long way to go. But I think democratization is a process. We can't walk in and decide Jeffersonian democracy tomorrow for Somalia. You know, that we are going to instill it, that all of a sudden, all you little women's groups are going to rise up and take charge. And we're going to go out to the little Sultan of Afgoy and get the old guy up and say, you're going to be part of the political process and lead Somalia. Huh? You know, I mean, all he wants to do is sit under his acacia tree and tend his goats, and you all of a sudden are going to instill democracy here and all the intricacies of democracy. Maybe you can't get there from here. Maybe you need the beginnings of self-determination, the beginnings of a participatory system. You know, and the process has got to be viewed as one that I want to see Somalia in 15 years be a reasonable, viable, democratic-like government. Instead of the UNISOM went in and said, we can put democracy in here in 2 years. You've got to be kidding me. I mean, they weren't on the same planet that I was on out there. I mean, it won't work. There may be some more basic things that you need, like let's stop them from shooting each other. Let's stop them from starving to death. You know, let's get them to the point where they can at least eke out a living, gain some stability in life, some order in the way things go about here. And if we can get those kinds of things started for right now, that might be a good goal in the first 2 years. And democracy is way out there. So I get a little frightened by this kind of idea that it's going to be democracy in our time. Obviously, it's a noble goal. Obviously, we want it. But I would rather see us frame it in the early stages in much more achievable, reasonable steps. We want to begin a process that leads to some form of self-determination. And it will begin with some degree of stability, some degree of a reasonable life expectancy, free of want and fear. That's our first step here. And then maybe in decades from now, we can get to that point. So when I hear comments like that or statements like that, I think it's a little too fast. It's a 0 to 60 kind of mentality that seems to be implied in all that. And it's got to be a much simpler approach. Yeah, you know, one thing that impressed me in all these operations, you're going to see things that make you swallow hard. You know, I don't particularly think Adid's the greatest guy in the world. And eating goat meat and drinking grapefruit juice with him at dinner and pretending like I liked him was a little tough. But probably a guy like that can bring a degree of stability in the short term that no one else in that country can. Not him alone, but those of his ilk, the other faction leaders. They're the only ones with, as the deed's term was, that have the capacity to administrate and to lead. Now, is there a way, at least initially, that those so-called warlords have to be part of the process, and I can use a carrot and stick and a little leverage on them to say, look, obviously you're going to have to be responsible for the leadership in the near term, but it's going to have to be under certain conditions or else there won't be the support. If you want the support and the contributions and economic growth, there are rules you're going to have to play by. But they'll have to be part of the process initially, although we don't like their means and the way they do business. To do it otherwise is too noble, too ambitious, and too unachievable in the short term. The problem we have is stomaching that in the short term. It's just too hard to think that you're going to sit down with somebody that's that ruthless and that big a butcher and have to deal with him in some sort of civil manner and accept his position of leadership. In some places, that's the only alternative in the short term to success. And if we're going to subject ourselves to the self-criticism that that's not full democracy and it's either that or nothing, you can't succeed in these places in the third world. It can't get there that fast. Even the Soviet Union. I mean, when I went into former Soviet Union and went around and with Armitage, and we were looking at a recovery process politically toward a democratic government and economically toward a free market economy, man, I said, this is the other superpower? They can't get there. I mean, it's going to be tough enough to get there politically and get to some form of democracy, which is really going to be hard. I didn't see free market economy. You got to be kidding me. I mean, when a kid goes into a store, stands in line for 5 hours, buys something, goes out in the street corner and says, I'm going to sell it for 2 rubles more. Service charge for standing in line. I got it here. You can have it for 2 rubles more. We say, go get her. Entrepreneurship. Love that kid. The old ladies beat him with umbrellas, trying to get ahead. That's wrong in this society. You don't ever try to get ahead. You don't ever try to express a form of entrepreneurship or personal ambition. It's alien to everything we know. You know, when you go into a store and you see you go up to a clerk, there's only 4 things on the shelf, and you say, I want one of the 4 things. Well, this shelf writes you out a big sheet of paper, or this clerk writes you out a big sheet of paper, hands it to you. You go stand in another line and wait to hand it to another clerk, to pay that clerk, who gives you another sheet of paper, and you go back and find another clerk who goes and gets it and wraps it for you, and you say, you know, for an inventory of 4, which I've depleted by 25% right now, you probably only need 1 employee, get rid of the other 2, and have the cash register right there where you deal with the customer, and you're going to succeed. Are you kidding me? That means 2 people would be fired? That's alien to their way of thinking. If you tell them that free market economy means